Nicholas, thank you so much for being on the show. I'm really excited about our conversation. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thanks you so much for having me.
There's so many different routes we could begin with when it comes to psychology, and you have decades of expertise in this field. So I feel I'm going to try and get the most out of our 30-ish minutes. The first place is something we were just discussing right now off air, which is the art of conversations, and more precisely, how to look at the real issue and not use other things to hide the real issue, so to speak. So, how do you think we could improve our conversations and address the real points?
Um, Thank you. Thanks for that great question. I think one place to start might be uh, to sort of talk about what human beings deal with 24/7, and they deal with two realms of experience. The two realms of experience that we deal with are, one, the so-called real world. I say so-called because we all have different ideas about what's actually happening. But this is a table, this is the chair, we are having a conversation. There's that realm of experience. And the other realm of experience that we necessarily are involved with is the unconscious. And I don't mean anything fancy about that at this point, but simply that we have all kinds of motivations and interests and feelings about things that we're not aware of, or that we're only partially aware of. So when it comes to conversation, conversations are articulations of those two realms of experience. Whatever we talk about is a distillation of what we think is going on, and other things that are going on that we're not aware of. So a typical example is our fights between couples over things like, who forgot to bring the milk home tonight, or did you not, you hurt my feelings when you didn't go to so-and-so's party. And those topics are not irrelevant. It's not that those things are not irritating or of interest, but they often carry a kind of misguided weight, and they function as proxies for other conversations that are much more difficult to have. Sometimes often I think we don't even know what they are. But a good clue is that if you're involved with, if you have repeated conversations about things that are pretty silly, like ice cream, who goes to the party, all that, you may want to ask yourself, like, what's really going on around here? Like, there's a lot of activity and passion invested in something pretty basic, something pretty quotidian and ordinary. So I would say, paying attention is probably the best thing. And as we were talking earlier, I think the world of language is extremely potent and necessarily impactful. And the more we can be aware of the language we're using and the topics we're choosing, I think the happier, more productive we're going to be. So the person, let's just say, I'm mad at you because you forgot the milk. Okay, so you forgot the milk and that's a drag. But I'm really mad at you because you haven't understood what I've been talking about for the last 20 years, for example. Or there's this thing that happened between us that was really important to me, and I wasn't able to articulate it then. And so it's growing and it's getting more and more toxic. And so I blast you for the milk, that kind of thing. Freud called that the psychopathology of everyday life. And I think we all have it. So I don't think there's any quick fix or one size fits all, but I would say, to the extent that we can, simply pay attention to the words we're using. Someone said, one of my patients used the word entitled when he was talking about something recently. And I stopped him at a certain point. I thought, well, that's interesting. Entitled immediately kicks up the conversation to an intellectual plane, right? Who's entitled to what? What is the meta-analytic understanding of human rights? Which is not an uninteresting question, but what he was actually trying to describe was something perfectly ordinary. Like, could he say something to his brother? Could he say, I'm worried about you, or something like that? I forget the actual context. And I thought, well, is that really the question? Is it the question, do you have the right, or are you entitled? Well, it doesn't seem like the question. The question is, why are you so hesitant to share something that you value with your brother? Like, what's going on there? It's not about precedent. The minute we talk about entitlement and precedent, we start sounding like lawyers. And I think, nothing against lawyers, but it's not the most psychologically potent conversation to have.
Yeah, so having higher awareness of our own motives and asking the right questions can help to highlight some of the things that are happening on a subconscious level. What are some of the patterns that you've seen over your years of experience? And I'm thinking, particularly as most people are listening to the show are high achievers, what are some of the patterns that you've seen in terms of high achieving individuals? What drives them, what their pain points are, their fears, and how can they overcome them?
Yeah, yeah, that's a meaty question. I think that the culture we're in, and not just now, but I think this has been going on for some time since the beginning of the country. I think we have, for better or for worse, a pronounced emphasis on work and accomplishment and success, and those things are often defined simplistically as how much money do we have in the bank, what are our things, how much can we buy, and all that. And some of that, of course, why not? I mean, I'm not anti-capital, certainly. But I think there's been a kind of malevolent transformation of success at the expense of experience. So, we're unfortunately, a lot of us, especially, I would say, the party that you articulated, the driven, the successful, the entrepreneur, all that, aspects of which are wonderful. But we're all too susceptible to what the Joneses are doing, and are we doing better than they are? What are the optics? I don't know how many times I say that in the course of a week. I'll say something like, seems like you're really concerned with the optics. And if your goal in life is to succeed in the optics, then that puts you on a certain track, right? So then you do want this, you do want a lot of status symbols, and you want a lot of recognition, and that's fine. Have at it, but just be clear that that's what you're up to. So I would say, to answer your question more succinctly, I would say that there's been a substitution of productivity at the expense of experience. Someone just said the other day in my practice, they said, "This sounds frivolous." I was like, "What? What do you mean it sounds frivolous? Experience is frivolous?" There's a horrible phrase I just learned a few months ago, actually. The sort of statement of, you don't want to be the richest man in the graveyard. I think that's stunning. I think that's really stunning. I mean, unless you do, right? I mean, I'm literal enough to say, if that's your goal, have at it. I mean, I don't see my goal. I think just to make a plug for psychoanalysis for a minute here, I think if psychoanalysis is successful, it means that someone has a great deal of clarity about what they're doing. And hopefully they're not doing anything, antagonistic for anybody else. But it's certainly not interested in making you into a certain carbon copy of the perfect human. It's not interested in that. I don't care about that. If you want to be a poet or you want to be a capitalist, I have no interest in either one. But I am interested in you knowing what you're doing. Like, what's going on around here is one of my favorite questions. Like, what do you think you're doing? It's like, you want to do that? That's great. Go have at it. But be clear that that's what you want. You want to be the richest man in the graveyard? Okay. It's not what I would hope for you, but let's be clear. And there also, this should be said, there are many, many different ways of getting clear in this world. And psychoanalysis doesn't have a monopoly on any of it. I mean, psychoanalysis is very, very effective for some people who are into it, but so is behavioral therapy, so is cognitive therapy. So, religion functions very, very well for some people. So I think another thing to keep in mind in discussions like this, I say this all the time, is that one size does not fit all. But I do think it's our responsibility to ourselves and to the culture that we live in to be thoughtful and clear about what we're doing, as opposed to what we think we're doing.
This is a big part of my mission, in the sense that, for me, one of the most important things is to lead our life with intention and clarity of intention, and to lead it with greater alignment, purpose, and joy. And from what you're saying, it's helping people to deviate from this autopilot that they don't realize they're in, to a life that is authentic to them. And one of the 5 regrets of the dying is not living authentically. And so this is sort of an interesting point, because if I say this to someone who has never taken time for learning, self-awareness, self-improvement, journaling, they don't realize that they're living partly on autopilot, just driven by past behaviors and traumas repeating themselves. So how can we help people to shift from this mode of autopilot to live more authentically and with greater awareness. Aside from investing hours in psychotherapy, that's definitely one way. But what else can people do to start to shift a bit their autopilot and be a little more intentional in how they choose to live?
Again, great question, and many ways to respond to that. I think as a general statement, we have stories in our heads about where we've come from and who we are, that aren't the best stories to tell. So part of what I think and feel as a psychoanalyst is that I try to help people tell better stories about where they come from. And it's not arbitrary. It's not like there are 1,000 stories that are all perfectly fine. That's not true. But there's no one story. Or to throw it back on literature, when we typically think of great literature, we think of great storytelling. And a great story isn't a happy or a sad story or a sexy story. Or a great story is something that captures the nuances and the contradictions of what it means to be human. And very few people have the opportunity to think about that. So I am struck when I talk to psychologists, psychoanalysts are pretty good at this, but there are a lot of mental health folks out there who do not take an exhaustive history. And by that, I don't just mean facts and how much did you weigh when you were born and all of that. I don't mean that. I mean, tell me from the beginning what you remember. And lead me through the first, 15 years of your life. Like, where were you born and who were your parents and what were your early memories? And so I think people are ill-equipped to achieve the kind of things they actually want to do because the stories they tell themselves are not inclusive of those experiences. They're not telling good stories. I say this. I sometimes get in trouble when I say this, but I say, well, I ask someone about their history and they tell me some kind of cartoon version, like, and it happens, I had a perfect childhood. I always love that. That's always music to an analyst's ears. I had a perfect childhood. My father was great. My mother was great. I had a dog that I spent on Sunday. I always think, well, why are you here if you had such a great childhood? But that's the point, right? Is to try to deconstruct the often brittle comic book like narratives that we tell ourselves. And once we've, and I say that as though that's easy. That's not easy. And the reason we don't do it, and the reason we're not taught that, and the reason our parents don't know that, is that to actually create a personal narrative or narratives necessarily involves thinking about things that we'd rather not think about, and have feelings that we'd rather not feel. We don't want to think about the fact that dad lost his business, or that mom died in a car crash, or that someone had an affair. We don't want to think about that. We just want to think about, went to a good school, I'm basically good looking. That's not a very interesting story. So I say to people, when they say that, I say, if you read that in the New Yorker, would you keep reading? Like, would you read that story? You probably wouldn't, because there's no meat on the bones. It's like a cartoon. So-and-so is bad, so-and-so is good. So anyway, I think the business of living is tough. And I think that there are many ways to help us get out of the ruts that we're in. But one of them, and one of the things that I think I try to do, is help people with their narratives.
So from what you're saying, being clear on our narratives and going a bit more in depth and not having just a cartoon version can help us in then leading a more intentional life. And this makes me think of a concept that I recently found out about, which is emotional granularity, which is all about, I mean, you know this, but I'm saying it for the audience, all about describing our emotions in more depth and more granularity. So it sounds to me like what you're saying is similar. It's more granularity, nuances to the story that we see of as ourselves. And with that, it's more complete, it's more rich, and it can help us to understand ourselves better.
Yes. And I think it needs to be said that these are not static stories. These are not like, this is the story, it's done, I'm sending it to the publisher. That's not the story. The story is dynamic. The story is, I had a friend years ago who was an analysis, longer than I was. And he said that the father of his first analysis was different from the father of the second analysis. And I thought that was such a great statement, right? It's like, yeah, I mean, this is not, there are facts. I believe in facts, and I think we're in a post-fact world, which we could talk about also if you wanted to. But I think that, our relationships are never over. People may die, we may not see them, but they're internalized. And the way we've conceptualized our caretakers, if we're interested and curious, will be necessarily dynamic. And there are times and periods where you look back and you think, my father was a son of a bitch. And then, other times you'll say, yep, and he was also really playful. So how would I say this? I think one thing I would wish for my patients is that they attain a kind of fluency so they're not intimidated by their psychology. And so, like Proust and, remembrances of things past, when you eat a Madeleine, you might have all kinds of associations, right? And those associations and the connections you make are not positions. They're not like, aha, I've arrived and this is the answer to that. It's part of who we are. It's part of the fabric of the mosaic, I think, of what it means to have a psychology. But we're certainly not taught any of that, and rarely, if ever, is it modeled. I just read there's a wonderful article in the New Yorker just recently on gaslighting. And for your readers who are interested in it, I recommend it highly. And gaslighting is, something that can be very malevolent, and parents intentionally wanting to contradict and debate their kids' experience. There are malevolent, hostile people out there. But there's also a kind of gaslighting that's perfectly normative, where, back to the conversation about feelings, when we don't like what we're hearing, we often want to confront someone's experience and say things like, that's not happening. How many times have you heard that? I feel X and Y, and no, you don't. Like, that's gaslighting, right? It's not malevolent in that you don't really know you're doing it, the person. But so I think that's another thing to keep your eye on. How often do we do that? I mean, I have a daughter, she's 20. I did it myself. I would catch myself, would play every time, probably not, and say, what Daddy just said doesn't make any sense. Something like that.
Something like that. You mentioned several interesting things. You mentioned also this idea that we live in a post-fact world. You want to share a bit more about this?
Yeah. Oh goodness, I'm certainly not the first person to say this. I think some scholars trace this back to the war in Iraq with the weapons of mass destruction, where there actually weren't any. I think there's been a great disillusionment with authority across many different platforms, to the point where highly intelligent, educated people don't trust the CDC or the police or the judicial. I mean, there's a lot of, and I don't mean just, I don't mean conspiracy theorists. I mean that there's something that's happened as a result of different forms of dissatisfaction, where we just don't trust the way we did. So a fact, what's a fact? Let's just take science. I did not go to medical school. I went to umpteen years of other kinds of school. But I do not have any position in my mind to question, my internist who went to a top medical college, right? So if he tells me X, Y, Z, I'm basically going to believe him. That's a fact, right? But there's a lot of us who don't believe that anymore, who over and over again will distrust authority simply because they have the authority. So I think that's a big problem. I think if you're not an engineer and you're not a medical doctor, and you're not a this, you're not a that, you don't really have a leg to stand on, right? Like, what kind of information are you referencing? And this leads us into what we talked about some time ago in terms of critical thinking, which used to be called just thinking when I was a kid. But critical thinking means you should be smart enough to look at sources that you feel are trustworthy, right? And read those sources and come up with different opinions and synthesize those opinions, and not ignore or contradict findings and facts that you happen not to like. I mean, that's one of the scariest things I think is happening these days. is that the post fact world is in danger precisely because they don't pay attention to facts. They can't even agree on what a fact is. And which is not to say that all experts are great, obviously not, which is not to say there's not a lot of corruption and problems and chicanery going on. That's true. That's always been true. But I think it's important not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. If I'm having surgery, I'm going to talk to my physicians. I'm not going to talk to the people who, run the flower shop.
Well, yes, it comes back to what you were saying about maybe the fear of our own psychology, or not being able to confront and look things as they are. I know that when I read the 6 pillars of self-esteem, one of the core things that marked me in it was this ability to see things as they are and actually confront your reality and deal with the circumstances instead of turning a blind eye and ignoring that. And I think a great part of what people get from seeing a psychoanalyst or someone else that's helping them is the fact that they suddenly need to confront things that they've maybe pushed under the carpet and have tried to ignore for years. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, again, I have nothing but compassion for this. It's really hard to look at yourself, and I think that's the first step. I mean, I've been doing this forever, and it comes off of my tongue very easily. But I am not unaware of how difficult it is. And there's some people, again, intelligent, lovely, great. They just can't do it. They can't. They won't. I mean, just the simplest thing. Couple has a fight and somebody's feelings are hurt. There are couples who say, one will say, "I don't apologize." People say that, but I don't apologize. It's like, well, okay, you don't apologize. You don't have to, but that's going to be, that's going to be a bit of an issue, I think, with anybody who actually wants to communicate with you on a deeper level. And when I use that word, deep, I don't mean complex, philosophically fraught. I don't mean that at all. I mean simply, it's called reflective functioning. It's called psychological mindedness. It's the assumption that when you're in contact with anybody, you necessarily contribute to their experience in ways that you don't know you do. It's not about fault. It's not about blame. It's about the mutuality of impact. And there's some people who, when you say that to them, they light up and they go, "Wow, that's great. No one ever said that before." And then they start doing it. It's like magic. And there are other people who will say, "Absolutely not in 1,000 years am I going to go near that." Couples, and especially not to get into the gender issues, but as a rule, my experience over many years, men are much worse than women are. Men are typically the ones who don't want to come into couples therapy because they can't. It's that whole. Often it's part of that whole male thing. Boys shouldn't cry. Boys should just be, Spartan. And, meanwhile, the women are saying, like, what is going on with you? You're like a brick wall. You never speak. You have to put your feelings. So, again, my heart goes out to those guys because, it ain't easy. What does Kermit say? It ain't easy being green. So it's hard. This is all difficult. And I try to make it as pleasant as possible, but it's not unlike going to the dentist sometimes, I think, for people where they really are squirmy and so uncomfortable about taking a look at what's happening for them.
Yes, I think it is hard and it is challenging. And this is a big part of what I talk about when I talk about self-leadership. It sounds all nice, self-leadership and leading yourself, etc., but it's actually extremely challenging. And seeing certain past traumas, but also certain current patterns and certain maybe circumstances in your life that you don't like or that you're trying to repress or ignore, and confronting all of that brings on a tidal wave of emotions, and then afterwards dealing with the emotions, and then so it's a whole cyclical journey. And yes, and that's why many people don't go on it. But the positive side is that then, like you said, you're no longer scared of your own psychology and you start to understand a bit more, and you can maybe laugh sometimes at your own patterns. Because I know, for instance, I have high achiever patterns, and I've worked on not being so attached to achievement, just appreciating the journey. So I call going from high achiever to high performer, enjoying the performance, which is the journey and the progress and the process, and not being so attached to the result. But when it comes back, when I see myself joining a course, and getting leveled up and doing all the points really fast, I laugh, I smile, because it's a pattern I've seen so often in myself. And I think to get to that level, you first need to sort of deconstruct it and break it down a bit.
Yeah, no, I think that's right on it, and that would be what I refer to as a kind of fluency. Like someone when someone's playing the piano and they mess up, they don't stop playing. They keep going. And they probably hopefully they learn from that. And I think fluency in psychology is a big chew, and like you have to really be in for the project. And it's not about. I'm glad I remember to say this. People are afraid, understandably, of diagnosis. There's some people who really want to be diagnosed, and other people who can't stand it. I'm not sure which is more difficult, actually. But just to talk about this briefly, diagnosis is essential in medicine, precisely because if you get the right one, you do get the best treatment. That's the whole basis of it. The basis is simply, if I'm a medical person and I give you the right diagnosis, then you will receive the top care as we know it, right? And it's different now than it was in the 1800s. In psychology and psychiatry, it's much more complicated than that, because it's not simply a question of biology. It's a question of psychology and biology and context and all that. So I am not interested in pathologizing anybody, but I am interested in being clear about when there's a problem. You can call it whatever you want to call it, but there is something called normal and there is something called abnormal. And without understanding that, not in a judgmental way, but in a thoughtful way, we're completely at sea. And so at what point does someone's eccentricity bleed into the realm of pathology? Well, we have debates about that. If you're rich, it's easier to be eccentric, right? So if you go to London, Lord James is running around naked in the yard, they'll just come and probably put him back to bed, right? But if you're black in the South Bronx and you do that, they're going to arrest you, right? So there's all of that conversation to have too, in terms of what's normal, what's not, what's the socioeconomic contribution to diagnosis, and there's many studies been done on this, that if you present with the same psychological malady at different in different geographic locales in the United States, you'll be diagnosed differently. Same behavior, and if you're and what color you are and how rich you are, and that will all play into it. So when I was teaching, I would ask my graduate students, what's neurotic about neurosis? Like what's pathological about pathology? Like what's the problem? And I think that question often gets rid of the judgment, or if not, it puts it in high relief. Right? Like what's the problem? You're drinking a bottle of scotch a day. What's the problem? Well, the problem is that that's bad. Well, why is it bad? Now, there's certain people who drink a bottle of scotch a day and are fine, except for the fact that their liver is going to be shot. But there is no problem, right? More commonly, the problems are, falling down drunk, getting in trouble, your wife is mad at you, your husband. I mean, that's a problem. That's the problem then. It's not the alcohol per se. I mean, of course it's the alcohol, but that's not really the issue. The issue is, as in medicine, the pathology means something's getting in the way of something is breaking down. So what is the problem is, I think, a really good, often overlooked question. We just assume it's a bad thing. Well, why is it a bad thing? I used to treat a very famous historian who drank a bottle of booze a day. He's no longer with us. But in his experience, that wasn't the problem. So okay.
Yes, actually looking at the root of what the problem is and why we see it as a problem, it can highlight certain factors and help us gain clarity on it. On a bit of a segue, I saw on your website that you are greatly inspired by classics and literature, and I also love classics and literature, so it made me smile when I saw this. Are there 1, 2, 3 books that are maybe your go-to, or that you refer to often, or that you think about a lot, that you think have enhanced your knowledge on psychology?
Well, I think there are probably too many to mention. I think, yeah, I didn't know what I was doing for long. I mean, not that I do now, but I really didn't know what I was doing for many years. So I got too many degrees in too many subjects. But I do love the ancient Greeks. I love Homer. I read Homer in Greek when I was at school, and um, the there's a humanity in Homer, in those huge poems that I do think of regularly, mostly in terms of character. I think I think the poets and the novelists know much more about psychology in many ways than psychologists do, and I think that's, when we talk about great literature, I think that's what we're talking about. Is that you read Homer, you read Achilles, and you read, Agamemnon, and all those folks, and it's like it's stunning. So I found that moving and inspirational. I can't say that I necessarily use this one or that one, but that he's the first one that came to mind. If he was a he. Um,
Amazing. We're already approaching the last minutes of today's episode. This has gone by so quickly. What would you
yeah.
like to leave the audience with if they're on their own journey of self-discovery? What would you recommend them?
Um, I would ask the question, which I ask myself regularly, like, what do you think you're doing? Yeah. Like, how would you describe what you're doing? With no assumption or certainly no judgment, but just if you were to articulate to yourself what you're doing in this life right now, what would you say? And what's going well for you and what's not? And what do you think the problems are? What do you think the successes are? And, as Aristotle said, how would you choose to live? How do you choose to live? I think if we ask those questions, I mean, there would probably be a lot fewer wars, certainly. But anyway, thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been fun talking to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nicholas. And great point around asking those questions. I'm regularly asking myself, is the life I'm leading aligned with how I want to lead it? Which is pretty much similar along the same lines. So glad to see that we think in a similar way. Thank you so much for being part of the show.
Thanks so much.